What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors reaches his absolute breaking point on live television? Tonight, we're diving into the explosive confrontation that had George Clooney walking off Stephen Colbert's set, leaving the audience in stunned silence, and the host scrambling to salvage what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview. This wasn't your typical celebrity meltdown. This was a calculated takedown of a talk show host who pushed way too far. And what you're about to hear will completely change how you view late-night television forever. The tension had been building from the moment Clooney sat down, but nobody could have predicted the verbal war zone this interview would become. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story gets absolutely wild. And I want to hear your thoughts on who was really in the wrong here. The Late Show's studio audience was buzzing with excitement as George Clooney made his entrance, that trademark smile lighting up his face as he waved to the crowd. What they didn't know was that backstage, just minutes before, Clooney had been blindsided by a conversation with one of Colbert's producers that had already put him on edge. The producer had casually mentioned they'd be discussing some recent tabloid stories, but Clooney assumed it would be the usual harmless celebrity gossip. He had no idea what was actually coming. Colbert's opening was smooth as always, welcoming Clooney with seemingly genuine warmth. The first few minutes played out exactly as expected. Light banter about Clooney's latest film, some jokes about his coffee company, the kind of safe territory that makes for easy television. But then Colbert's tone shifted, almost imperceptibly. At first, like a hunter moving in for the kill. "So George, I have to ask about something that's been making headlines," Colbert said, his smile never wavering but his eyes taking on a different quality. "There's been some interesting reporting about your foundation's financial dealings, specifically regarding donations that allegedly went to some questionable organizations overseas." Clooney's expression changed instantly. The easy smile faltered, replaced by something much more guarded. "I'm sorry, what exactly are you referring to, Stephen? Because I think you might be misinformed about our foundation's work." "Oh, I think I'm very well informed, actually," Colbert replied, pulling out what appeared to be a printed article. "This investigative piece suggests that millions of dollars intended for humanitarian aid somehow ended up funding political movements in several unstable regions. Care to comment on that?" The audience sensed the shift in energy immediately. This wasn't the playful back and forth they'd come to expect from celebrity interviews. This felt more like a cross-examination, and Clooney was clearly caught off guard by the aggressive line of questioning. "Stephen, I'm going to stop you right there," Clooney said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "First of all, that story you're referencing was completely debunked by multiple fact-checkers. Second, you're essentially accusing me of funneling money to terrorists on your show without giving me any advance warning that this was going to be the topic of conversation. Well, that's what makes for good television, isn't it?" Colbert shot back, his fake smile becoming more pronounced. "The spontaneous moments, the real reactions. Surely someone with your experience can handle a few tough questions." "Tough questions?" Clooney's voice rose slightly. "Stephen, you just accused me of financing terrorism based on a story that was proven false. That's not a tough question. That's character assassination." The studio had gone eerily quiet. Even the band seemed to be holding their breath. Colbert, however, appeared to be enjoying himself, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of someone who thought he held all the cards. "Look, George, I'm just doing my job here. If you can't handle the heat, maybe you shouldn't be in the kitchen. This is what journalism looks like in the real world." That's when something snapped in Clooney's expression. The diplomatic Hollywood smile was completely gone now, replaced by the kind of cold fury that comes from someone who's been pushed past their limit. "Journalism? You think this is journalism? Stephen, you're a talk show host, not Anderson Cooper. And right now, you're acting like a tabloid reporter who just learned what Google is." The audience let out a collective gasp. This was territory none of them had expected to venture into tonight. Colbert's face flushed red, his carefully constructed persona cracking under the unexpected assault. "I don't think you understand your position here, George," Colbert said, his voice dropping to something much more menacing. "You came on my show to promote your movie. I'm giving you a platform. Maybe show a little gratitude instead of attacking the host." "Gratitude?" Clooney stood up from his chair, something that almost never happens during a talk show interview. Stephen, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've sat through thousands of interviews, and I've never, not once, had a host ambush me with false accusations and then lecture me about gratitude when I defend myself. The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife as Clooney remained standing. Towering over Colbert, who was still seated behind his desk, desperately trying to regain control of the situation. The camera operators weren't sure where to focus. The audience sat in stunned silence, and the producers in the control room were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let this train wreck continue to unfold. "Sit down, George," Colbert said, his voice carrying a hint of desperation, masked as authority. "You're making a scene. I'm making a scene." Clooney's laugh was bitter and humorless. "Stephen, you brought me here under false pretenses, ambushed me with debunked conspiracy theories, and now you're upset that I'm not playing along with your little game. Let me tell you something about making scenes. You've been making one for the past 10 minutes. Colbert's facade was crumbling completely now. Gone was the charming late-night host, replaced by someone who looked genuinely rattled by the pushback he was receiving. "Look, this is my show, my house, my rules. If you don't like the questions, there's the door." "Your house?" Clooney's voice rose again, but this time there was genuine incredulity in it. "Stephen, this isn't your house. This is a television studio owned by a major network. You're an employee here, just like everyone else. And right now, you're doing a pretty terrible job." The audience was beginning to murmur among themselves. Some, clearly uncomfortable with the hostile turn the interview had taken. Others seemingly riveted by the unfolding drama. A few people in the front row were actually recording with their phones. Despite the show's strict no-recording policy, Colbert tried to regain his composure, straightening his tie and attempting to project some semblance of authority. "You know what, George? I think our audience deserves to know who they're really dealing with here. This is exactly the kind of entitled Hollywood behavior that regular people are sick of. You can't handle a little scrutiny, so you throw a tantrum. Entitled behavior." Clooney's eyes flashed with anger. "Stephen, I've spent the last 15 years of my life using my platform to draw attention to genocide, human rights abuses, and humanitarian crises. I've put my own money, my own reputation, my own safety on the line to help people who have no voice. And you want to sit there and lecture me about entitlement because I won't let you spread lies about my foundation on national television." "Spare me the Saint Act Colbert," shot back, his professional mask completely gone now. "We all know what this is really about. You Hollywood types think you're untouchable, that you can just show up, say whatever you want, and everyone should bow down and thank you for gracing us with your presence." The contempt in Colbert's voice was unmistakable now, and it seemed to hit Clooney like a physical blow. For a moment, the actor just stood there, processing what he'd just heard. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but somehow more dangerous. "You know what, Stephen? You're absolutely right about one thing. I did think I was untouchable. I thought I could come on your show and expect to be treated with basic human decency. I thought I could trust that a fellow professional wouldn't ambush me with false accusations and then mock me when I defended myself. I guess that makes me naive. Finally, some honesty," Colbert sneered. "Maybe now we can have a real conversation." "Oh, we're having a real conversation now," Clooney replied, his voice taking on a tone that made several audience members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Let's talk about real things. Stephen, let's talk about how you've spent the last year desperately trying to stay relevant in a changing media landscape. Let's talk about how your ratings have been sliding, how you've been losing ground to every other late-night host, and how you've apparently decided that manufacturing controversy is your path back to relevance." The color drained from Colbert's face. This was clearly hitting too close to home, and his response was immediate and defensive. "My ratings are fine, George. Better than fine, actually." "Are they?" Clooney pressed, clearly sensing weakness. "Because from what I've heard, your show is hemorrhaging viewers. Young people don't watch traditional late night anymore, and older viewers are getting tired of the same tired political commentary night after night. So you figured you'd try to create a viral moment by attacking me. Is that it? You don't know what you're talking about," Colbert said, but his voice lacked conviction now. The confident host who had started this interview was nowhere to be seen. "Don't I?" Clooney leaned forward slightly, his presence somehow filling the entire studio. Stephen, I've been in this business longer than you have. I know desperation. When I see it, the audience was completely silent now, transfixed by this brutal psychological warfare playing out before them. Some looked horrified, others seemed unable to look away. Like witnesses to a car accident, Colbert tried one more time to regain control, his voice rising to match Clooney's intensity. You think you can come in here and psychoanalyze me? You think you can turn this around and make me the villain? I'm not the one who stormed out of charity events. I'm not the one with the sketchy foundation finances. I'm not the one who thinks being in movies makes me some kind of moral authority. Sketchy foundation finances. Clooney's voice was deadly quiet now. Stephen, you keep coming back to that debunked story. Why is that? Did you not do your research? Or are you just hoping that if you repeat a lie enough times, people will start to believe it? The silence that followed Clooney's question was deafening. Colbert's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, clearly scrambling for a response that wouldn't further expose his lack of preparation. The sweat beading on his forehead was now visible under the studio lights, and his usually pristine appearance was beginning to show cracks. His tie was slightly askew, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it, and his trademark confident posture had devolved into something that looked more like a cornered animal. I have my sources, Colbert stammered, his voice lacking any of the authority he'd projected earlier. Multiple sources. Actually, your sources. Clooney's eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. Stephen, are you seriously going to sit there and pretend you have some kind of investigative journalism background? Your sources are what? Twitter, Reddit, some blogger with an axe to grind. The audience was now fully engaged in this destruction. Some leaning forward in their seats, others covering their mouths in shock. A few were shaking their heads, clearly uncomfortable with how far this had spiraled, but unable to look away from the carnage. My research team is very thorough, Colbert insisted, but his voice cracked slightly on the word thorough, undermining whatever credibility he was trying to project. Your research team, Clooney repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. Let me guess. That's some 22-year-old intern who spent 15 minutes on Google and printed out the first conspiracy theory website they found. Stephen, do you have any idea what actual research looks like? Do you know what it means to verify sources, to cross-reference information, to actually fact-check before you destroy someone's reputation on national television? Colbert's face was now bright red, a combination of embarrassment and rage. You don't get to lecture me about journalism, George. You're an actor. You pretend for a living. You're right. I am an actor, Clooney acknowledged, his voice taking on an almost conversational tone that somehow made his words even more cutting. I pretend for a living. But you know what? I don't pretend to be a journalist. I don't pretend to have credentials I don't possess. I don't pretend that hosting a comedy show qualifies me to conduct serious investigative interviews. And I sure as hell don't pretend that ambushing guests with false information is somehow serving the public good. The camera caught Colbert's hands trembling slightly as he reached for his water glass, nearly knocking it over in the process. The smooth, practiced movements of a seasoned television professional had been replaced by the awkward fumbling of someone who was completely out of their depth. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Colbert said, his voice rising to near shouting levels. This condescending Hollywood attitude, like you're better than everyone else, like you're above criticism. Above criticism? Clooney's laugh was sharp and humorless. Stephen, I've been criticized by everyone, from movie critics to foreign governments. I've had my work, my politics, my personal life dissected and analyzed by people far more qualified than you. The difference is, they based their criticism on facts, not on debunked conspiracy theories they found on the internet. Those aren't conspiracy theories, Colbert protested weakly. Then prove it, Clooney challenged, spreading his arms wide. Right now, on your own show, prove it. Show me the evidence. Show me the documentation. Show me anything other than a discredited blog post that's been floating around right-wing message boards for the past 6 months. Colbert's mouth opened, but no words came out. He shuffled through the papers on his desk frantically, clearly looking for something, anything, that might support his accusations. The rustling of paper was the only sound in the studio as hundreds of people watched a man's credibility evaporate in real time. You can't, can you? Clooney's voice was quiet now, but it carried to every corner of the studio. Because there is no evidence, because you didn't do your homework, because you thought you could just throw out accusations and I'd sit here and take it like some publicity-hungry starlet desperate for screen time. I don't have to prove anything to you, Colbert finally managed, but his voice sounded hollow, defeated. You're absolutely right, Clooney agreed. You don't have to prove anything to me, but you might want to think about proving something to them. He gestured toward the audience, then toward the cameras. To the people who trusted you enough to invite you into their homes every night. To the network executives who are probably having some very serious conversations right about now. To the advertisers who pay good money to associate their brands with your show. The mention of advertisers seemed to hit Colbert like a physical blow. His face went pale as the full implications of this disaster began to sink in. This wasn't just a bad interview anymore. This was career-threatening territory. Stephen Clooney continued, his voice taking on an almost paternal tone that somehow made his words even more devastating. Let me give you some advice, free of charge. When you don't know what you're talking about, the best thing to do is stop talking. When you've made a mistake, the honorable thing to do is admit it and apologize. And when you've bitten off more than you can chew, the smart thing to do is cut your losses and move on. Are you threatening me? Colbert asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Threatening you? Clooney seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. Stephen, I'm trying to help you. Right now, you have a choice. You can end this interview with whatever dignity you have left, or you can keep digging this hole until it becomes your grave. What's it going to be? The studio fell silent again, everyone waiting to see how Colbert would respond. His hands were visibly shaken now, his breathing shallow and rapid. For a moment, it looked like he might actually take Clooney's advice, might find some way to gracefully extract himself from this situation. Instead, he made the worst possible choice. Get out, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. Get out of my studio. Clooney nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting this exact response. Gladly, he said, beginning to remove his microphone. But Stephen, when you wake up tomorrow and realize what you've done here tonight, when you're dealing with the fallout from this spectacular display of unprofessionalism, remember that you had a chance to do the right thing. You chose not to. As Clooney walked toward the edge of the stage, he paused and turned back one final time. Oh, and Stephen, next time you want to accuse someone of financing terrorism, you might want to make sure you're not confusing them with someone else entirely. The story you've been referencing, it was about a completely different foundation with a similar name. You'd know that if you'd bothered to read past the headline. The look of absolute horror that crossed Colbert's face in that moment was almost painful to watch. The realization that he hadn't just attacked Clooney with false information, but with information that wasn't even about him, seemed to drain whatever fight he had left completely out of him. Clooney disappeared into the wings, leaving behind a studio full of stunned audience members and a host who looked like he'd just witnessed his own career ending in real time. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of Colbert's complete meltdown, every second of his public humiliation. And that's exactly what happened when George Clooney reached his breaking point on live television. What did you think? About this confrontation, was Clooney justified in his response? Or did he go too far? Drop a comment below and let me know. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible behind-the-scenes stories from Hollywood that you won't hear anywhere else.